Tonight, I talk with writer-director Ari Bach about his new film, Jealous Gods. We discuss film theology and what it takes to be the next great deity in cinema. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am False Prophet, and today we are speaking with Ari Bach, who is the creative extraordinaire behind multiple projects, including webcomics, films, tarot cards, several novels, a novella, and a large variety of other things. Ari, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent. Okay, and you are also a longtime friend and contributor to Twisted Genius, which makes this especially relevant.
Thank you.
Well, for those of you who don't know, here's a little bit of background about this. Ari is responsible for the webcomic you will see on our site, Snail Factory, as well as several other key things, such as the black and white silhouette Twisted Genius logo that you see probably everywhere, including this channel and everywhere else. And he's done several other things, and I've also had the pleasure of helping him with some stuff. So, Ari, here's a question. With so many different projects that you've worked on, how do you define yourself?
As a filmmaker above all, everything that I do is either something eventually intended to be a film, or all of my drawings on DeviantArt, those are generally mostly designs for movies I'd make eventually. All of my novels are intended to be films. Even Snail Factory originally began as a screenplay, and there really isn't anything I do that isn't with the eventual goal in mind of filmmaking.
At what point did you decide that this was the path for you there? Was there a epiphany moment about being a filmmaker?
Yes, it came in my first year of college. I guess it would have been in late 2000 or early 2001. I saw a film in one of my classes called Un Chien Andalou, which is Louis Buñuel's first film that he did with Salvador Dali. And it was the first time I had seen a film that was absolutely 100% surreal. And before then, I had been a surrealist artist, and I had already written some scripts and things, but never really intending to go anywhere with it. But after I saw that film, I was 100% on board that I had to make movies.
And before that, when did you get started with art or the whole creative thing in general?
The earliest inklings of visual arts came in, I guess it would have been preschool. They had this drawing section of the preschool where you did this book called Draw Squad with Commander Mark. And it was just a really cool thing for kids to be able to draw in 3D, like, just how to draw a cube, how to draw a cylinder, stuff like that. And it was really creative, and you can still see chunks of it in all of my drawings, in just my general sense of aesthetics. There's still a pretty significant mark that made. Really, from preschool, I started drawing, and I think I started getting into surrealist art mostly because of H.R. Giger. As soon as I first saw the alien and its related beings and, face huggers and chest bursters and the alien itself, those really got me obsessed with what I didn't recognize then as surrealist art, but once I saw H.R. Giger's regular work, which was seriously ghastly and inappropriate for somebody, well, that's the really cool thing is my parents let me get Giger's Necronomicon from the library, but they looked through it and saw all of the unbelievably graphic sexual and diseased, weird, Giger-esque things. And they said, okay, you can look through the Necronomicon, but you can't look at the pages we've marked. And so for hours I pored over this book looking at some of the most disturbing art I'd ever seen in my life to that point. And to this point, honestly, it's H.R. Giger. It's the most disturbing art ever made. But every other page I wasn't allowed to look at. So I turned the pages and caught only these brief glimpses of what might have been in there. And the rest was my imagination. And that was probably the best thing that my parents ever could have done for me, because it got my imagination going at unbelievably intense speeds and depth, trying to imagine what I must have been missing in that book. So I started drawing all of that stuff, and that's where my style really emerged. And then I spent another 20 years trying to unlearn how to be an H.R. Giger ripoff and develop my own style, which I think I now have.
And for those of you who are interested, I will be linking to Ari's DeviantArt page in the comment section here, so you can check out his collection of drawings there. Okay, since we mentioned Alien, let's transition. You are a fan of the sci-fi genre, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And you've written 3 novels about that.
Yes, the Valhalla Trilogy is definitely intended to be, well, I'm not sure if it's hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi. It has a lot of character basis, but it's kind of hard sci-fi disguised as soft sci-fi if you start getting into the paragraphs about how all of the things work and what the society is actually based on. But those are also based on film scripts for movies I want to make eventually. The movies, it's interesting. I'm really happy I got to write the books, because in the Valhalla books, I got to get into depth with things that the movies don't cover at all. The movies are basically intended to be like Michael Bay times 500. They are nothing but action, explosions, and cool shit happening on screen. Whereas, so basically, the books kind of freed me up, because had I just made the screenplay as it was originally written into a film, it would have been a fairly normal film. But now that the books exist and I got all of the thinky material out of my system, basically I can make the movies as cinematic as I want. They can have minimal dialogue and work mostly in the language of film. And if people want to understand what the hell they just watched, then they can go read the book.
Some cross-marketing there as well. Excellent.
Yeah, not even intended, but it'll probably do fairly well if I can get the movies made.
Yes, well, I would say that usually if there's a movie version, that does tend to help book sales, so that's good.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You also have a novella.
The novella is another screenplay that's been adapted into a more literary format. It's called The Millennial King. It's about millennials of the year 1000, and they happen to have quite a few things in my book in common with criticisms of millennials today. It wasn't actually going to come out for quite some time, but the trailer came out for the Pixar movie Cars 3, and basically the entire premise of it appeared to be nothing but millennial bashing, just painting people of the younger generations as being over-entitled and underproductive, and it pissed me off so much that I released it years before where I had actually planned to.
One thing I've kind of noticed, and I admit part of this is coming from talking with you and even reading some stuff that you haven't published yet, I do kind of sense you have your own style when it comes to storytelling. I'm not talking about genres exactly, but I mean in the traditional sense, sci-fi, fantasy, action, that sort of thing. But I mean the type of characters and even the type of stories you tell, I do notice some level of consistency there. Do you feel like that's the case, or how would you define that?
I don't feel it, but everybody mentions it to me, so I guess it's there. One thing that somebody mentioned was that all of my projects seem to begin very funny and end very disturbing.
Yes.
And yeah, so I don't do that intentionally, but I guess that's just something in my style or whatever you could call it that keeps happening. hopefully I'm not, I'm trying not to write myself into a corner and become like a one note musician, but I don't know. I definitely tend to like things like degeneration in societies, the Lord of the Flies type thing. I don't know. It's just really fun watching things unravel to me.
Yes, it's the train wreck sort of style.
Yeah, especially with the latest script of mine that you've read, which is inspired by things like the production of the Island of Dr. Moreau movie from the 90s, documentary about it, where things just keep getting worse and worse to hilarious extents. Or J.G. Ballard's novel High Rise, there's a Tom Hiddleston movie of it now. I know it's a cliche to say the book was better, but the book was quite a bit better.
The book is often better.
Yeah, it was just a great display of these people who set themselves up in a high-rise building that they never have to leave, and it slowly degenerates into sectarian violence between the floors. And if anybody is listening to this who has read the third Valhalla book, that's what's happening in Ballard Heights, and that's what Ballard Heights is named after. It's basically a microcosm of that novel that I've commandeered and turned into a side attraction in my own.
Well, that type of degeneration, the idea of, let's say, going from comedy to tragedy, I think that's actually a proven formula. A lot of things have done that. Not quite the way you do it. In fact, yours I would describe more as degeneration rather than a switch. But I think that kind of thing does work in scripts.
The plot format, as it's known, I think is not at all to my taste. I'm sure everyone listening has seen the plot graph of ascending action, climax, and descending action. As far as that's concerned, I think that most projects of mine, at least, should start during the ascending action rather than having that dead space at the beginning. And I don't believe in descending action at all. I believe in ending at the exact moment of the climax. I should specify that that is for creative endeavors, not for other things. But with a screenplay, the way they teach it to you is the inciting event happens on page 20. And I have literally run into people in Los Angeles who have looked at my scripts in which the inciting event happens on page 1, because that's where I think it should happen, at least for my stories. And they looked at it and said, okay, the inciting event should happen on page 20. So what are you going to fill the first 20 pages with? I was like, nothing, because it starts where it's supposed to start. There is nothing that comes before that. And in all of my favorite movies and all of my favorite works, they don't waste 20 pages introducing you to the characters before something happens. They start with something happening, and that thing grows up to the climax, and over that period of time, that's where you come to meet your characters. So with Jealous Gods, it opens with them getting their superpowers, and a couple people have actually written in since the release saying that it feels like the movie starts in the middle of the story, because there should have been 20 script pages of getting to know the main characters as they went on their adventure to the inciting event. So I don't know, I can't imagine what's lost by starting there and introducing the characters as part of the ascending action.
Now, we can easily segue here into Jealous Gods because you mentioned that, and you have just released for free the full movie, Jealous Gods, your first full-length feature film that you wrote and directed. How did that project start? Let's start from the beginning there. Where did that idea come from?
The earliest parts of Jealous Gods that came out were random ideas. I have thousands and thousands of ideas for scenes or characters or moments or visuals that don't necessarily belong to any project at first. Some elements of Jealous Gods go back to when I was a teenager, but there were two other major inspiring events that started solidifying and congealing those ideas into the actual film. One of them is the movie Chronicle from, I think, 2012. It's a movie about three, I think they're high school students who get telekinetic powers. And forgive me if you like the movie, but I couldn't stand it. I watched it and thought, this is one of the biggest missed opportunities ever. And basically every single thing that I like to see in a movie, Chronicle avoided doing, and everything that I find uninteresting or cliche in a movie, Chronicle did end up doing. So, that's my own personal taste. It's obviously a very popular movie. A lot of people like it. I have nothing against them as human beings, but
just their taste is horrible. No.
well, I won't even get that confrontational.
Okay.
So I saw this movie and thought, this is a huge missed opportunity. The premise has so much potential, and this movie did not go at all where I would have sent it. So with that kind of shit or get off the pot mentality, I wrote a screenplay of what I would have done with that premise. And it wasn't Jealous Gods. It was titled Jealous Gods, but that's only because I'd been wanting to use that title for something for like 10 years. But it was an interesting little screenplay that had basically the skeleton of what became the movie. And I liked this screenplay enough that I figured, it's different enough from Chronicle, aside from the basic premise, that if I got rid of everything that was in Chronicle, I would have the nucleus of what could be a pretty damn good movie. So I started the coagulation process, sticking all of my other ideas that I thought would be cool into this project. And then the other big inspiring event for it, once I had that screenplay going, was your concept of villainy. You and I had some conversations about, I guess it began with the lack of good villainous content in the world. There weren't really any things that had villains the way that you talked about them and I talked about them. And so I realized the Jealous God script, as it was then, actually had the potential for a very compelling villain who could also be a main character. I guess it provided a format for me to implement some of the ideas we talked about, and that's really what made the final screenplay.
Yes, well, I mean, needless to say, the villain aspect is definitely one of the things I really like about that. I was actually planning on asking you about the title there. It's very interesting that you're planning to do that for a while, apparently. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? The title, Jealous Gods.
Seriously, I just thought it sounded cool and wanted to have a project. I tried numerous projects under that title, various stories about, let's see, one of them was a kind of, it was like the movie Seven, but it was a descent into a world of kind of an underground serial killer network that eventually became a small part in another project that I haven't really done too much on. But no, there were numerous projects that I tried out under the title Jealous Gods. And finally, when I got the anti-chronicle script done, I was like, oh man, these people are like gods and they're jealous and I should use it on this one. So that's where the title came from, and the script definitely went through a lot of changes since then, but the title remained absolutely perfect in my opinion.
It's highly appropriate for the script. If I remember correctly, it is a nod to a biblical passage, isn't it?
Yeah, technically, God somewhere in the Bible refers to himself as a jealous God. So it has Bible cred, if that's what people are in.
well, it's kind of interesting because it's not exactly what you would think of as what I would call an anti or, different type of superhero film, but it seems weirdly appropriate when you think about it in those terms, though.
Yeah, I think another element in Jealous Gods actually comes from some disagreements I have with the graphic novel and adaptation in film of Watchmen. Because Dr. Manhattan is supposed to be, I guess, selectively omniscient. He's omniscient up to a certain point, and he's omnipotent up to a certain point. And he doesn't act the way I think that somebody like that would act. And the answer to how I do think they would act are two of the characters in Jealous Gods. I won't go into spoiler territory yet, but I basically split some of his powers up among my own characters and said, if somebody actually did know everything, Dr. Manhattan has a different moral system from most humans, but nowhere near as much as an actual omniscient person would. And that's where the biblical reference comes in, that there's actually this whole scene that got cut out of the movie, mostly because it was too windy on the day we shot it and the sound was horrible. And also the scene was a very boring discussion of philosophy. But they go into the idea that an omniscient person would have a moral sense so egregiously different from any human being that by our morals, they would probably be pure evil. And if you look at the Old Testament God, he really is pure evil. Sodom, Gomorrah, the floods, hardening Pharaoh's heart so that he could show off his plagues and kill all the firstborn, when theoretically, if you look at the Bible logically, which is a very, very bad idea if you like the Bible, you end up with a calamitous, vicious God. So in making my own Jealous Gods, I wanted to explore, just the infinitely deep hole that a human being could dig themselves into. Chronicle tried to do that, but it did so at an after-school special level. It basically had a kid who's been abused, so of course he just throws a hissy fit at the end and throws cars at everybody. And I think spoilers for Chronicle, gets impaled on something. That is just not very compelling, in my opinion, when you're dealing with superhuman minds. So my movie ended up being, it's 2 hours of people talking to each other. But I think what they talk about in my movie is more interesting, to me at least, than any of the action in the other movie.
Could you argue then that Jealous Gods is also a commentary on superhero films in general?
Yeah, not so much in that it attempts directly to spoof or satirize them, but in that it turned out so vastly different from any Marvel or DC movie simply by merit of trying to write what would actually happen. Jealous Gods is very much based in my own logical estimation of what would happen if people actually had superpowers. And it's just so different that I think it ends up exposing all of my objections to superhero material. To be sure, I love Marvel Comics movies. I like at least one DC movie now that Wonder Woman is out. Their efforts up till Wonder Woman weren't particularly impressive to me. But, going back to the Tim Burton Batmans, though, where there was some really great material, but it was never what would actually happen, in my opinion. So Jealous Gods is an hour 45 minutes of exactly what I think would really go on.
From what I can tell, based on a lot of the comments and feedback that I've read about the film, that is the strong point that a lot of people see with that. The kind of completely different take, quite possibly more realistic take, and just the philosophical depth of it seems to be what really appeals to people there. And of course the moral ambiguity of it, which is part of my personal favorite part of that. For anyone who's watched this show before, or this channel, I'm very into villainy, and there is definitely some of that in Jealous God.
Yeah, I'm very happy that people are picking up on that as the central appeal of the movie. I made it to be a pretty humorous movie. I don't think there's anything I've ever done that doesn't have some degree of my sense of humor, for better or worse. Jealous Gods is a comedy film, but I'm really happy that people got into the brainy, thinky material that I crammed in there.
One thing that I like about all of your work is that often it works on very different levels. I mean, you're thinking about stuff, and not just Jealous Gods, but in many of your projects, philosophically, but also humorously, and of course, in many cases, such as Valhalla, you have action, and then, of course, character development is also something that many people have commented on, especially with the Valhalla series and Jealous Gods. There's so much stuff there. One thing I'm going to say about the Valhalla series, and I'm going to link to all the books in the comments below if anyone wants to check those out, Amazon there, is that it's really hard for me or anyone, from what I can tell, to really describe the value of those. If I'm going to be completely honest, although I love Jealous Gods, I still think Valhalla is probably your greatest work, that trilogy there.
I won't object to that because the Valhalla movies that are intended are definitely going to be way, way, way beyond anything in Jealous Gods on every front and from every angle. The Valhalla books are seriously just the boiled down movies in literature form, and those are among my best movie projects. Jealous Gods is really my cheapest movie project from a financial point of view. It's the only one I had enough money at this point in my life to fully produce at a proper level. Valhalla will take tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to make, but Jealous Gods could be told properly as a story on pretty much no budget at all.
The one thing that surprised me about when you were decided to do the actual film of Jealous Gods, you and I had discussed actually doing this as a webcomic first, and then that got put on hold. That was completely my fault, by the way, for anyone who's wondering. You just kind of came out and said, okay, I want to make a movie of that, and I admit I was very surprised about that. You also went through, just in the time that I was discussing it with you, you went through many different versions of the script, I remember. And do you want to talk about maybe some of the previous things that maybe got left out or changed between then and what actually ended up in the film?
Yes, I think the biggest thing that got left out of the film as it was is that the original screenplay was much more literal about sexuality. And what happened in the final version of the script is basically everything sexual in the movie got turned into subtext. Anytime that people are talking about using their powers, there are some scenes that are more overt than others, but there's one where the three boys are laying around their dorm room talking about who would you do, and they're talking about teleporting, and Clark is talking about who would shoot him. Those were more face value in the early scripts, but I very much prefer it the way it is now, where everything that the original script went out and said, hey, look at this. This is how this would happen. Now it's a little bit more covert, and I think as a result, it's much funnier and it has more opportunities to be clever. It brings depth to it. It's like with Barry Lyndon, this Kubrick movie, it seems like a fairly normal 3-hour long historical bio movie, but when you start thinking about it, it is dripping in subtext. I mean, what every scene is about has a double meaning, and you can get incredibly deep into that film on a ridiculous level. And so I wanted to play with something like that because that was just the coolest thing to watch unfold. I wouldn't say I actually left anything behind with the old scripts except for obviousness.
Ah, okay. Would you say that when you do projects like this, I mean, even the Valhalla books, you're looking for people to analyze them deeper? Is that one of your goals for your work?
They can. It's not so much that I want people to have to dig through my stuff to get the good content in it, but as much as if they are to dig into it, because people will dig into pretty much anything.
Yes.
I want them to be able to find something good. One of my projects was a fairy tale about this kid with a horn, and it was basically written based on all of those people who analyze Alice in Wonderland on a Freudian level. And personally, I don't think Carroll actually meant for most of the stuff that people find in Alice in Wonderland. I don't think he meant most of it to be in there. I think he probably intended Alice in Wonderland to be a fantastic and amusing story with some clever bits and pieces. Obviously, there's some stuff that is probably not for children of his era, but the story I wrote with the kid with the horn was designed specifically to be a fairy tale that if you wanted to analyze it in Freudian terms, it would have an amazing cornucopia of really bizarre psychological implications and societal implications. I guess that one's unreleased at this moment. I don't know, maybe we'll see that one eventually.
I actually have had the pleasure of reading that one, and I really think that that one would make an excellent book just on its own, by the way. Transitioning for a moment to Facts I Just Made Up, that is your blog, and that's probably what you're most known for. Would you agree with that?
Unfortunately, yeah, it's kind of like being best known for, well, literally, Facts I Just Made Up started out as a dumping ground for jokes that weren't good enough for for Valhalla, and especially for the blurbs to Snail Factory. That's where the blog really took off, was when I was writing all of those blurbs that go beneath each Snail Factory episode. That's
Yes.
what the first facts were. They were just jokes that didn't really fit into there. So yeah, the blog is now up to 123,000 followers who know me for literally the worst reject jokes I've written.
Although, I will say that not all facts on that blog are created equal. You have the ones that I consider kind of the standard ones that everyone just, as soon as they see on their feed, this is a Tumblr blog, by the way, for those of you who don't know that. But then you occasionally do these ones that are very long, and I love those ones because those ones are the ones that usually fool people. They're very in-depth, and you can even see that sort of what you were talking about earlier, that degeneration there, where you'll start off and it'll be something that seems completely reasonable, and then it'll just go into absurdity and ridiculousness about the third of the way through. And one of my favorite things, I think this is the part of the appeal of the blog, is that a lot of people will say, wow, you got me there. I thought this was a real thing until I start reading this and be like, well, wait, what? That isn't right.
Yeah, Facts is actually a microcosm of its own problem in being the reject jokes. For the Fact blog, I will write some of those, 10-page long posts about like a made up culture that works completely based on peaches or something.
Yes.
And I'll put, hours of thought into this thing, and it'll get maybe 100 notes. Whereas my most popular post with about 500,000 notes is a bunch of puns that I made off of people using various euphemisms to ask to see my genitals. So for the first one, I posted a bunch of gelatins or whatever, and they kept coming up with weirder and weirder ways to ask, and I kept coming up with weirder and weirder replies. So basically, the most popular thing on my most popular format is a ongoing dick joke, and on my most popular formats, most thought out, interesting, fun posts, at least to me, they go pretty much ignored.
Wow, okay, I was not aware of that. That's sad. Although, I'm gonna just go ahead and say that says more about the general public than you. But I have a confession to make. I've been tuning into facts since the beginning. You mentioned how you started them as partly a dumping ground for the Snail Factory blurbs, and of course I was obviously privy to that. And it's only been very recently that you got me for the first time.
Really, which one did it?
It was the one about before the Wonder Woman movie came out. You did one about the future of DC films. I don't know if you remember that one specifically. I think you said something like they were going to be handled by Marvel at one point from now on or something like that.
Yes, I do remember that one, and that's one of the ones that definitely degenerates from something.
Yes, yeah, that.
I wish I could remember where it ended up, because it went one step beyond
Yes.
taking over.
I was honestly so stunned that I got caught, because I've been reading these for years, and that was the first one that ever actually tricked me.
I have actually come across some of my older posts and thought, like, there is no way that, oh god, I just got myself.
Oh, wow. Actually couldn't believe it, because I kind of taken pride in the fact that, I just watch everyone else get fooled by these all these years there, and then just, wow, okay, that one got me.
It was that DC Comics had not only been taken over by Marvel, but because Marvel is owned by Disney, the next movie was going to be Avengers 2 Star Wars.
Oh, yes, right. I remember that now.
Yeah, the Avengers versus Darth Vader.
Yes, I remember that now. Yes, that was the one that finally got me. Yes, I did not realize that was you till almost the end of it there. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, I think the Peach-based one that I mentioned, a lot of people wrote in asking again for, the name of the tribe and trying to figure out where the
Oh, wow, went that far.
One of the jokes was that for the whole post, it sounds like kind of a Margaret Mead study of Papua New Guinea, expected to be a tribe that nobody in America would have heard of, but in the end, it's revealed that they're in downtown Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, yes, I caught that. That was awesome.
And at least two people. Yeah, I think it was just the two people, but they wrote in saying, you said that this tribe exists, but then you said that they're next to Marvin's muffler shop. And I was like, yes, it's a joke.
I was kind of reminded of that episode of Venture Brothers where it's implied that
Underland.
Underland, yes, that's the name. Yes, where that is actually located.
Yes, that is probably the joke. I was probably just ripping it off directly. That was one of the greatest Venture Brothers moments, where it's like Doctor Doom and Latveria in between the United States and Canada.
Yes. Okay, so moving forward in the Jealous Gods time period here, chronology, you decide to make this into a film. So what happened? How did you get this together originally to actually create the film as it is now?
It's kind of strange. Jealous Gods first became an actual film because of kind of a strange circumstance. When I went to film school originally around 2000, I dropped out because I got fed up with it. And then while I was researching Jealous Gods and looking into college campuses where I might be able to shoot it, I started becoming a regular on the campus of UCCS, University of Colorado Springs. And at one point I met the head of their film program, and he was basically the mentor that I left film school because I didn't have in the first place. And I ended up going to UCCS and finishing my degree. And for my final project in film school there, I made a movie, and generally college film schools do not want you making feature films, but the guy there, Robert von Basanowski, who is absolutely a mentor to me in every positive way a person can be, he said, go ahead, try to make a feature, and I did, and I got to make Jealous Gods, which is ironic in the end because the screenplay for Jealous Gods had a lot of my anger at college from the first time I went to college and couldn't stand it. So it was a very angry, kind of anti-collegiate script. And I ended up making it at basically the most ideal college imaginable in using their campus. So the campus that is portrayed as Overlook University in the film as a horrible, horrible school is actually at the best school I've ever found to date. And it was made with the help of not the people it ridiculed, but their counterparts at that school.
You do sometimes have what could be perceived as a glum or cynical version of the Earth. Although I will say that I noticed that when you describe your stuff, you don't always quite see it that way, such as the ending to the Valhalla Trilogy. You made a case that it's actually a positive ending.
Yeah, I think that one's a positive ending, and my view of the Earth is usually cynical just for humorous effect. I'm a fairly optimistic person, or at least I was until November 7th, 2016. Something happened around there that has disappointed me. But other than that, human nature to me is not an absolute negative. And I think that it's more fun to play with the degeneration of humankind so long as humankind actually has a chance.
Yeah, well, it's easier to joke about stuff like that if you have a positive outlook in a certain way, because otherwise it's just not funny, it's depressing.
Yeah, and I don't like stuff that's actually genuinely depressing. I like humorously depressing. There's a filmmaker, Jean-Luc Godard, who makes movies that are incredibly cynical, and they're cynical without redemption. And I think Valhalla is very humorously cynical, but it doesn't actually condemn humankind for being the ultimate evil or horrible thing. There are good things in there. It's like real life. There are good things, there are bad things. I guess depending on how depressed I was when I wrote something, it'll either be fairly hopeful or fairly grim. Jealous Gods is an interesting one because a lot of people have been approaching the ending of Jealous Gods as a very negative thing, and more rarely a few people are approaching it as a very positive thing, at least for the people that the movie seems to care about. And that dichotomy is exactly what I intended. It's a morally relativistic ending where it's a good ending if you're one character, and it's a bad ending if you're another character.
At the risk of doing spoilers here, in fact, I'll just say that we might get into some spoilers here in a moment, and I'll try to put some timestamps in the comments there to tell you when we're entering and exiting spoilers for anyone listening who wants to avoid them. But let's discuss for a moment the ending of Jealous Gods, because I've heard that some people do find it ambiguous or have trouble understanding what's actually going on there, or I don't know, maybe they don't like it, or what do you think is happening there with that kind of reaction?
I think a lot of the ambiguity is actually an error on my part having to do with the visual effect. For anybody listening who wants to know what the ending of the movie is, it's that Quail dumps an entire mountain range on the college. And the way I decided to portray that in the film, being a very low budget endeavor, was I got drone footage of the mountains of a drone going straight up over a mountain range, and I flipped it optically and played it in reverse so that it looks like the mountain range is falling on you. I guess it's not entirely effective for everybody. A lot of people seem to have gotten exactly what it is, thanks to the shot of Dawn looking up at the shadow, but a lot of others don't seem to have gotten that out of what the shot is, so that's kind of a mistake on my part in just playing the effects a little less digitally than I could have. I could have done even the Monty Python foot thing of just a mountain falling on the college. I like cheap effects, honestly. I like effects that are done in a proto-digital manner of, it's like with Cinefex magazine, if you've ever seen that.
Yes.
If you read Cinefex magazine up till about 1995, it's amazing. There are all of these homegrown solutions, really weird ways that people made special effects, and it's just an amazing world. And after 1995, Cinefex uses the word computer a lot now.
When I see behind the scenes material of a lot of especially, older, by older I mean what you just said, pre-1995 films, it's kind of amazing how, I want to say the word janky, but not necessarily a negative way, but just kind of almost haphazard some of these special effects came together. Just people just kind of like rigging stuff up on the set, to make stuff happen. It's kind of incredible. I mean, you think that you have even these really large, very expensive films, but it's always funny to me how a lot of times a few people are responsible for these iconic scenes, and sometimes they're not even that well scripted, or no one figured this out before the shooting started or something.
Yeah, I was just listening to a Star Wars commentary track where they explained the sound design for several elements, and for the sound of the speeders going along, it's somebody recording the highway outside of USC Film School through a vacuum cleaner. And I love that. I love when movies have creative solutions instead of advanced digital solutions. And that's just a personal taste thing. And there was this whole digital backlash going on, and now there's actually a anti-backlash saying, computers are fine, they're just a tool, which is absolutely true. But for Jealous Gods, at least, it was a $10,000 film, half from Indiegogo, half from the college. And on $10,000, you can't afford to drop mountains on a school and make it look realistic. So I had to get creative, and personally, I still like the last shot of the movie, but I understand now that not everybody could fully get from it what I wanted them to get from it. With Jealous Gods, a lot of what happens to justify the very end scene. Actually, pretty much all of it is designed in order to get the characters where they need to be and to make them who they need to be to justify how it ends.
Do you have a philosophy about how these things should be approached, or do you think it's just, it's really kind of however you decide to put it together in that particular project? Do you have a goal for how you would like to approach things?
Very pragmatically, it's whatever works. With Valhalla, I wanted to have all of these fight scenes where people go to superhuman lengths to avoid pain, or not avoid pain, but they're in unbelievably painful situations that no human should be able to tolerate, but like in any normal movie, they still keep on fighting. But I wanted to do that realistically, so I came up with pain training, and pain training led to death training, and death training led to the convention in Valhalla that as long as your brain is still active, you can be saved. They can grow you a whole new body. So, and those in turn inspired many more plot elements and devices. So all of that came from my desire to have really epic fight scenes where people kept fighting, and to make that realistic.
But that also works very well with what might be accurately predicted future, sci-fi type elements too, because I tend to think that as humans, that is kind of where we're going. We want to be able to be effectively immortal. I actually would use the argument that humans' MO, our whole reason for being as a species, or the direction we've chosen, seems to be we want to be gods, and immortality definitely seems to be a desirable thing. And you could argue that what we see in Valhalla is a few steps further from where we are now in that journey there.
Yeah, I think at all times Valhalla and its elements and whatever I put into it were influenced by modern science and predictions of what might come next in science, as any good speculative fiction will. It's interesting that you mention immortality, though, because a significant chunk of Jealous Gods is actually a dig at people who think immortality, as portrayed, would be a good thing. We've both encountered a few people who believe that they are immortal and believe that immortality is the great goal of all humankind. And Clark actually developed specifically as a spoof against those people, saying, if you were actually immortal, you would outlive the universe, and that would be really, really boring.
Yes.
So that's another example of how some odd things end up influencing the art form. I had a dispute with somebody who thought he was immortal, and I thought he was an idiot for thinking he was immortal. So Clark exists.
Yes. Well, one other thing I really like about your way of doing this is you were talking about pragmatism in how you put together your stories a moment ago. And I kind of respect that sort of engineering approach, I would call it, you have to story building there, because that's kind of how I think about stuff. In fact, with the game development thing, that's one thing I like about game development, but you kind of apply that to your plots a lot. You say, okay, this is what needs to happen here, and this is how this works together, and I think that's a really good approach. Do you think that's common, or how similar do you think that is to other creative people, filmmakers, scriptwriters, novelists that you've encountered?
I'm not really sure. I know there are people like Jack Kerouac who basically wrote everything out in one long, unbroken passage and didn't self-censor it or alter it in any way. I'm guessing James Joyce probably did something more like that. I think that film as a medium, though, requires a bit of an engineering approach because constructing a film is very much an engineering task. But for my own purposes, I do it that way because I have to. Whatever skill it is that lets authors write an entire novel in one burst without altering anything whatsoever, I sure as hell can't do that. Nor would I really want to. I like building things from the ground up and taking ideas that I have and matching them and mixing them around and just figuring out what works best to get what I want to do done. And as a surrealist, often what I want to do is a completely off-the-wall, bizarre thing. Some of the Valhalla action sequences are more like surrealist paintings than like movie action sequences. And in order to justify them as science fiction, that's where I had to engineer an entire plot to justify them. So it's certainly what works for me. How other people do it, I can only imagine. It's on the same scale, though. A lot of movies today are being made by committee. They have writers' rooms instead of writers. They have a studio that basically assembles them to be the most profitable things ever. And I have no moral objection to that. It makes some really fun movies. But that's the other side that I can't get to. I could never imagine myself working with other people to design something so coldly, or at least it seems cold to me. I have to be the driving force behind anything I'm doing, or it doesn't interest me at all.
I once heard a quote when you were talking about the way films are made now that says, committees can criticize, but they can't create. Would you agree with that?
Not entirely, because you have movies like the Marvel movies that I believe are probably mostly made by committee. Those will always interest me as entertainment and as a pretty high form of art. It's inevitably going to be the things like Stanley Kubrick movies or Jean-Pierre Jeunet movies that are made by a single or at least very rarefied creative force working unilaterally to make a vision that if it were made in committee, it would get voted down because it's too bizarre.
And then we've also discussed films like the original Alien, which you've said, and I agree, is very rare, where you have a lot of different creative talent coming together to make something really spectacular there, and that's another way I suppose you could go with it if you're lucky.
Yeah, Alien is also another way that I can't really see myself working, because the reason Alien is so great is because it was a perfect symphony of just the right people for the job, doing just the right thing for the job. They had Scott as director, they had O'Bannon writing, they had Giger doing the creature, they had Mobius doing the ships along with a couple other people. I guess Mobius's big contribution was the spacesuits. For me, I want to do everything in my films. The only role that other people really serve on my side in terms of creativity is as bouncing boards for ideas, and the way that I've talked to you about things, and we've sort of organically assembled some things together, but primarily I'm sending you scripts and you're sending me ideas that for each other's projects. It's not so much a collaboration as a consultation, if that makes sense.
Oh yes, I agree completely. And in fact, I will note for anyone who's listening and just curious about this, 9 times out of 10 when we're talking to each other, we kind of ignore each other's advice too, I will say that. But at least speaking for myself, when you do give me a good idea, it is great, and I love that. And I get the impression that's sort of the same with you. Would you say that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely the same way where, I'll send you a script and you'll send me notes on the script. And most of your ideas will be things that don't quite work for what I want to do. But every so often you literally save the project from something, especially on Valhalla. To any Valhalla fans listening to this, the other person I'm talking to has saved the books from being the stupidest books you've ever read.
Well, thank you. That is very high praise. I really appreciate that. So, okay, let's talk for a moment about the cast of Jealous God. How did you get those people together, and how did you choose them?
Basically, we had an audition at the college, and there were about 30 speaking roles in the original script, and about 30 people showed up for the audition. So literally every single person there was got cast in whatever role we could use them in. Lucky did not get cast until shortly before his scenes were filmed. He was actually the teacher at the school who helped me cast the movie. This wasn't one of those things where you have an endless audition of people and you select the best ones out of thousands of people. This one, literally everybody we could cast got cast. The four main characters, basically, I got extremely lucky with. Especially Robert as Quail did an amazing job and created the character. Parker Fowler as Dawn really brought Dawn to life, just as he was written, basically. And Ryan Potter is visually and vocally perfect for Clark. Michelle Pantel as Bridge is literally the one element of the movie that every single person who has ever talked to me about the movie has had very high praise for, and I got extremely lucky in finding her. She actually didn't attend the audition. She couldn't make it on that day, so she sent in a videotape, and I saw it and was like, holy shit, it's Bridge! And she was able to memorize all of Bridge's long monologues perfectly. I didn't really realize it until honestly just a few days ago when I was writing the closed captioning for the movie, but the shit I made for Bridge to say, there is no way a normal human being can memorize and recite all of that in one take. And I was horribly cruel to the actors in doing 5-minute long takes of these long, long speeches. And Michelle seriously did all of them, not only word for word perfect, but in perfect character for Bridge in a way that makes that character come to life. I have the highest possible praise for her as an actress. The four main members of the cast did a spectacular job, and I could not imagine people doing a better job than they did. So in the end, I'm extremely happy with how the casting went.
In regards to what you were saying about how Bridge, some of those lines there, I remember when we were just talking about the script for a possible webcomic version of it, I remember thinking, okay, so we're going to have a bubble of dialogue for
Yeah.
for this. Like, okay, how many frames are we going to need to have her just stay there talking about?
Well, I think my idea for the webcomic version was to literally just have the dialogue in like a page of dialogue and have an image of Bridge crammed into the corner with a bubble remaining.
So, I also remember having some discussions with you. You had some trouble casting Lucky then, or are you were you satisfied with the actor you got for that ultimately?
Very much so. His name is Roy Ballard, and he's one of the teachers at UCCS, and he actually helped organize the audition. He did a great job. I love his inflections as Lucky. Originally, Lucky was supposed to be a very, very old man of 300, and I simply could not find any men that old.
Well, I think that goes without saying.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't find any people who would be believable as 300-year-olds, I guess I should say. Yeah, all of those 300-year-old actors, I don't know where they went.
Exactly, yes.
But Roy was essentially cast in the first place because he had a gigantic beard.
So that beard is real then?
Yes, that is his real beard, and it is pretty much the sole reason he was originally cast. Once he was cast, though, I think he knocked it out of the park, honestly. I love the way he talks, and I think that the cynicism of the character comes across better in him than it would have had I cast somebody of the age I was looking for. The initial cut of the movie was about 2.5 hours long, and it could have been about 2 hours 45 minutes long, which for a dark comedy like this would have been insufferable, absolutely unwatchable. We cut about 45 minutes of scenes, and what you're seeing when you see Jealous Gods is the leanest, fastest possible version of it. There is not a wasted second in it, really.
You mentioned it's a dark comedy. It's a genre that I'm very, very fond of, which is obviously part of the reason why I like this movie so much. Could you address some of the challenges of that as far as like audience reaction to that? Because I know from my own stuff and from what I've seen with other, especially big or bigger budget, there's rarely huge budget, but bigger budget dark comedies, sometimes they're very polarizing or people don't seem to get them. What are your thoughts on that, especially how they relate to Jealous Gods there?
I think Jealous Gods is more mainstream than Snail Factory was, and I remember Snail Factory being a huge problem in terms of audience because it was such a dark comedy and such a surreal comedy that it had a lot of problems finding a widespread audience. I think that my personal brand of dark comedy is very alienating to some people.
Yes.
I think all dark comedy is alienating to about half the population simply by merit of being dark comedy. Then if you go into surrealist dark comedy, you're alienating another 40% of the people. If you make a very intensive, extreme dark surreal comedy, you pretty much have like 0.5% of the population of the world who would actually even want to see it. And tastes become so varied and subjective at that level of comedy and dark comedy that even the people who do want to see it won't agree on it. So Jealous Gods, I wouldn't say I ever made any conscious attempt to rein things in and keep it normal, but it was naturally a more mainstream thing than my usual tastes. So even though a lot of people will see it and say it's dark comedy and it's just too much, as far as I'm concerned, it's actually probably the cheeriest, most mainstream movie I'll ever make.
Do you think it's possible, and this is something I've asked myself a lot, which is why I'm asking this, do you think it's possible to somehow bridge that gap, to have a dark comedy but somehow convince audiences to like it on a very mainstream appeal, or is that just completely off the table as a possibility?
No, I think it's very possible. There was some MTV Music Awards person who said that when Nirvana was around in the early 90s, they weren't at all mainstream and they didn't go mainstream. They said that Nirvana didn't go mainstream, the mainstream went Nirvana. And I think that that's probably the highest possible artistic achievement, is to take something that is so good it actually alters the fabric of what mainstream is. Alien is another good example. Horror was not mainstream at that time, at least not that kind of horror. Alien did not have a niche to fill when it came out, but it was so phenomenally good that it carved one out and made people shift their tastes to match it. Star Wars is probably the ultimate example of it. Science fiction had its place in the 70s, but nothing like what Star Wars was. But Star Wars was so overwhelmingly great that suddenly science fiction was the mainstream thing. You see that on varying scales throughout Hollywood history, but where dark comedy is concerned, I don't think it's happened yet. Probably the infatuation with postmodernism that resulted from Fight Club is the closest thing.
Well, but Fight Club is one of those films that you and I both agree is just amazing. It's definitely one of my favorites. I know you've listed it as one of your top 5, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think it's been edged out by now by, I think City of Lost Children and Nightmare Before Christmas made a resurgence that kicked it out of the top 5.
Ah, okay. My information is dated on your... Usually, although it's a tough call, usually I consider American Psycho my favorite movie just overall, and that is definitely a dark comedy right there. And that one, of course, is just horribly polarizing, but it definitely has its own cult fan base there, and Fight Club found it too after a little while.
Yeah, I think those two movies together actually created a bit of a trend in the early 2000s that it was a strange trend and I liked it a lot, but I'm kind of happy it hasn't lasted into modern times, because if it were trying to go on now, it would probably just be sickening.
Yes. Well, they do have a tendency to take things too far once they decide it's profitable, I guess.
Looking at Nightmare Before Christmas is another mainstream shift, and, well, actually, Nightmare Before Christmas doesn't have that many emulators, if any. So
well, unless you count Tim Burton himself.
Well, that's the thing. Tim Burton stopped emulating Tim Burton and started just making normal movies after a while, in my opinion.
That is true. I was just watching Big Eyes the other day there, and that's kind of not as Burton-ish.
Big Eyes is, I think it's a very good movie. It's just a very normal movie.
Yes.
I would like to make something like Nightmare Before Christmas that grabs more than its share of the mainstream and holds on to it, but remains unique as something that nobody can really match and nobody would really want to try to.
Actually, I think Nightmare Before Christmas actually did accomplish that now that you mention it.
Yeah, I think so, and it may be pretty much the only thing that popular that doesn't have 800 sequels.
Yes, that's true.
There's, nobody ever made, I don't know, like the Nightmare Before Hanukkah or the Nightmare Before Columbus Day or anything.
There's a whole forest full of holiday towns. Why are they not just milking that for all it's worth and cheapening the brand?
And the fact is, it's Disney. It's kind of shocking and astonishing that there is nothing to follow Nightmare Before Christmas. There must have been some weird contractual obligation not to, or because look at Hot Topic; they're still selling Nightmare Before Christmas.
No, it's remarkable. I mean, with that Hot Topic culture, especially, just clung on to that, and it really hasn't let go.
Yeah, so why is there no sequel to Nightmare Before Christmas, and why isn't Disney pumping it as a franchise? There is some dark and eldritch abomination behind this that we don't understand. Yeah, I would very much like my cultural place to be something similar to that, where I would make something, and this, we've discussed Fall of the Rebel Angels before. Fall of the Rebel Angels is a project, it's a gothic opera done in death metal music with ultra surrealist imagery, like something out of a Tool music video, or a Brothers Quay film, or at times even like Nightmare Before Christmas, though usually much more Gigeresque and dark and bizarre. But it's a giant surrealist opera, and I would very much like for its place to be akin to Nightmare Before Christmas. But yeah, Nightmare Before Christmas grown-ups.
When it comes to what you would like to be known for, do you consider yourself, okay, this may be a dumb question, but would you like to be, let's say, Spielberg there, where he's known for so many different great projects like that, or would you prefer to just kind of zero in on one thing there?
I'd like to zero in on being known as a surrealist. Everything I do is in some way tied into that. The one answer, whenever I'm working on a project and I'm completely stuck and don't know how to get out of it, the answer is always surrealism. And when it comes down to what films I want to make, like if somebody told me, magically happening, you can make one film and one film only, there is no question that film would be Fall of the Rebel Angels. Valhalla is something that I care very much about, but it was literally started so that I could get popular enough to afford to make Fall of the Rebel Angels.
Oh, wow, I see. I did not know that. That's interesting.
Valhalla, to some extent, began as a very deliberate attempt to make something popular that I could sell out on, so that I could make the things that I really wanted to make, and Rebel Angels is the main one of those. But Valhalla has obviously grown in importance to me, and it's a huge part of what I want to be known for now.
I saw your Fall of the Rebel Angels, just a little sequence there when you had that up on YouTube. I did not know that you had such ambitions for the scope of that. I honestly thought that was just kind of a one-off thing you were experimenting with.
It's kind of my original, well, actually, it isn't my first project, but it's the one that I really exist for, I think. What you saw in the trailer is for what I thought I would be able to make of Fall of the Rebel Angels, which is to say a maybe $2 million Georges Méliès looking kind of oddity. But with things like Valhalla and knowing what's possible now, I've kind of abandoned all sense of modesty or decency and scale, and
You've gotten more ambitious.
yeah, the levels of ambition that I actually have for my project, you've seen what I want to do with the theater system and the Omnimax type globed screens and everything. And although I've been talking about those in the context of Valhalla movies, the thing they actually exist for is for Fall of the Rebel Angels to take on a religious level connotation. Francis Ford Coppola, when he was making Apocalypse Now, talked about his plans to have Apocalypse Now be in one theater, specially designed to show it, and it would be a national attraction like Mount Rushmore. People would go and visit it from across the country. I want to take that and apply it to a more Wagnerian sense, like he did with his theater in Bayreuth, and make people go on a pilgrimage to have a religious experience. I think that in the end, film, or at least cinema, is the ultimate form of communication to a human mind. And if you applied that to religious principles and religious functionality, then you have basically the ultimate experience with a God form. You have, the ultimate religious experience can be granted by the cinematic form as I've outlined it with those specific theaters and with a film like Fall of the Rebel Angels. So my ambitions have gone from making a weird little Nightmare Before Christmas knockoff sort of thing to supplanting God as the ultimate influence over mankind.
I like that. And based on a certain mutual philosophy we have there, one of the best examples that people would understand of a concept of psychodrama that I would use is movies. You walk in, you get involved in this thing. And there is definitely some parallels between that and religious ritual there.
Yeah, I think also some religions ranging from Crowley to LaVey that use psychodrama as a means to an end, rather than, instead of actually believing this ritual I'm performing is going to move angels to go attack somebody, it's about a fulfillment of the human ego. I think that the best expression of that is in the form of the suspension of disbelief for a movie. You go in, you forget you're watching a movie, and then you leave and you have the emotional catharsis of that movie without any of the bullshit, basically.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. One thing that I've noticed about your work, and I will admit this is a big weakness in my opinion of everything I try to do, that I think you maybe even unintentionally nail. And you see this with Jealous Gods, and I think this is part of the positive reaction to both Jealous Gods and Valhalla, is that you, despite the weirdness, despite the deliberate surrealness of stuff, you do seem to have a way of sort of capturing a level of the human element that I don't think a lot of people do. You have kind of depth of characters there, and that's very interesting.
If I do that, then it's a side effect, I think. It's like I was saying earlier, how a lot of the things in Valhalla and Jealous Gods exist for unconventional reasons. I think most mainstream filmmakers and writers and any form of artist sets out trying to capture the human element and trying to convey real drama and emotion and, the humanity of it that you're talking about. That's not something I have ever consciously tried to do. It's just something that's necessary as a step of engineering along the way to make the surrealism more effective.
I will admit I've never tried to do that, but I don't think I've accidentally succeeded the way you have either.
Well, I'm flattered that you think I succeeded. I hope so. But I don't know what actually constitutes humanity in those terms. I think if I tried to make a human movie that took advantage of that, I would probably fail. I think it's just something that somehow develops like a crusty fungus around what I'm doing.
Well, I think part of it is also the fact that it's just smart, and I remember just reading very recently one review of Jealous Gods after you released it there said that it doesn't really talk down to the audience there. It's very intelligent about how it portrays the characters. In fact, that very elements that you wanted to correct with Chronicle are part of, I think, that humanity element that we were just talking about.
Very, very much like to think that I do it because it's simply good filmmaking or good writing. I would like to think that I'm good at this stuff. Honestly, quality in those terms isn't something I care about very much. I would rather make a really weird, interesting, bizarre movie than one that is widely considered a good movie. But it's that same engineering sense that if you want something to be effective for whatever you do want it to be, it's for the better if the whole movie is good. So I am trying to make good movies. It's just that that's a means to an end.
So, what would you say is next for you as far as film projects goes? Do you have anything in mind that you care to talk about here?
My next project is an experiment in 3D that's kind of a homage to David Lynch and the Coen brothers. It will also be released online, hopefully this summer, also for free and in 3D, probably side by side. So anyone with a 3D device that can handle that will be able to watch it as intended. It's an exploration of 3D technique in ways that it's not being used right now. I'm not a big fan of 3D film right now because they do it in a way that they think is more cinematic and that they think is more easy on the eyes. It's actually harder on the eyes than realistic 3D. And although it is more cinematic as we know cinema, it's not innovative. Gravid is an experimentation in what a cinematic language would have to be in order to accommodate genuine 3D imagery that makes you feel like you're actually there inside of the location. So editing is going to be much different. Framing is going to be much different. There are many new rules. You can't move the camera as freely as you used to. You can't do close-ups because it would be like cramming the actor in front of your face at 2 inches away. So it's just an experiment to see what is and isn't possible in realistic immersive 3 dimensions.
Are you interested in pushing the tech or even the experience of cinema?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people are afraid of it because it means developing a new language, but I think that that's something that is well within our grasp, or at least I think it's within mine. We'll find out when Gravid comes out.
Its evolution is what it is. It's a necessity to progress and innovate.
Not only that, but as a surrealist, I like the fact that things go wrong when you explore. When evolution happens, it happens via mutation. And a lot of other filmmakers are going to be interested in the evolution of the art form. I'm interested in the mutation of it into places that it shouldn't go, into horrific deformities of cinema.
That is awesome. You've also done some stuff in the horror genre, at least script-wise. Is that something you're interested in pursuing in the future?
To some extent. I kind of want to do the Kubrickian thing and visit each genre and add my own mark to it. Like Kubrick, he rarely repeated himself. He made a horror movie, he made a drama movie, he made a war movie, he made a sci-fi movie, and so on and so forth.
whatever Clockwork Orange was.
I have no clue what Clockwork Orange. Yeah, he made things that simply don't have a genre. No, I'd like to visit all of the genres and leave my mark on them. I have horror projects, I have comedy projects, I have sci-fi projects and fantasy projects and drama projects and noir projects and pretty much everything.
Where would Jealous Gods fit in all of that?
Comedy.
Comedy, I see.
Jealous Gods is as straightforward a comedy film as I think I'll ever make.
So no Caddyshack, then, probably.
No, I never got into Caddyshack. I like Zucker, Abrahams, and Zucker and Mel Brooks a lot, but I don't think I'd make something like theirs.
Ah.
I think Jealous Gods is, if it has a genre, that genre is comedy.
With almost all of your work, though, you do seem to be very big on mixing genres a lot. I mean, a lot of your stuff, like Valhalla, for example, is very hard to define. It doesn't do it justice just to say it's sci-fi, or even just action, or comedy, or drama, or there's some even minor horror elements in it. I'm talking about the whole trilogy there. It's kind of hard to label in that way.
If you look at the nitty-gritty of it, yes, but I think that Valhalla is definitely just pure sci-fi.
Ah, okay. Yes, I suppose so.
Sci-fi allows for other genres to be mixed with it very freely. I don't think there's any such thing as a fully orthodox genre film, because no matter what you make, it's going to have elements of something else in it. I don't think you could make a pure horror movie because, I mean, what would that look like? It would just be 2 hours of people screaming. That wouldn't
It would be a snuff film.
Yeah, and maybe that's where cinema's going. No, I think genres are a spectrum, not a delineated pinwheel or anything.
Do you have any final thoughts on the topic of Jealous Gods, or why should people watch it?
Oh, if I could articulate that, there would be more people watching it. I guess I will just close on Jealous Gods by saying, if you want something to laugh about or think about or just enjoy for a couple hours, please give it a chance. It's free on YouTube and Vimeo, and just enjoy it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ari Bach, this has been an interview with the creative dynamo, director, and writer of Jealous Gods. He has the free movie up. We will link to that prominently in the comments below. And this is False Prophet with Twisted Genius. I appreciate everyone listening. And if you enjoyed what you heard, well, we honestly won't be doing much more of this kind of content, but I will have some other interesting things, some of which I alluded to in this interview. But if you want to support the channel, subscribe, give the video a like, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Stay evil, and good night.
I don't see a great deal of creativity in them. Even artists who used to be at the avant-garde are doing really, really normal stuff. We talked about how Tim Burton went from things as creative as Beetlejuice and Nightmare Before Christmas to stuff like Big Eyes or Dark Shadows. I think Big Eyes is a very good movie, but anybody could have made it.
It didn't have Johnny Depp.
Yeah, that's another thing. All modern movies seem to have Johnny Depp in them, and I'm against that.